not 90, it might be 80, 70%, but it's like the majority of all examples on the entire platform are all Hasan. So yeah, very clearly this is the reason why it's happening. Now, you can say that it's unfair, but that's fine. That's okay. But you can't say it's not happening, or that's not the reason.
And he also doubled down on that in his response to Ludwig's video, saying,
a lot of this is because a lot of people just don't like Hasan. You know it, I know it, everybody knows it. Hasan has said a number of things over the years that sound really bad. I don't want to get into a big debate about whether they are bad or who was right, but we can all acknowledge that there's a lot of people that didn't like him. Okay? A lot of people didn't like them. And people are using all of these examples to try to get advertisers to leave. That's the reason why. That's the main reason. So my situation might have made this bigger than it already was, but this was already happening before I even had I never got suspended. I didn't have anything to do with this.
Ethan Klein also jumping back into the mix, calling Ludwig out, saying he's sweeping this anti-Semitism issue under the rug.
Ludwig, why did you even bother to make this video? You know what I mean? You don't have to talk about it if you're too cowardly to explain it.
Or with Ethan bringing up when Hasan earlier this year interviewed a pro-Houthi Yemeni pirate, also criticizing Ludwig for how he talked about the Frogan incidents.
This level of anti-Semitism is platformed on a main stage of TwitchCon in front of these sponsors. I mean, what the do you expect, man? Don't blame the people sending emails. Blame Dan Clancy and his team of morons that did nothing to shield their ecosystem from this, especially considering they had so much time to learn from what happened to YouTube. Pure incompetence.
And while this blame game thing has gotten a lot of attention, there are also others saying that this Adpocalypse part of the situation, that it's actually wildly overblown. With us now seeing some streamers outside of the political space saying that their revenue has not been impacted. And specifically, some like Stock Guy pointing out that once he removed politics-related tags, his revenue jumped way up again. With then the likes of Hasan sharing that clip on Twitter and adding, this doesn't mean there isn't a concerted brigade effort cynically mass spamming emails to advertisers urging them to pull ads. There very clearly is one. And so ultimately we find ourselves in a situation where seemingly there has not been a full-blown Adpocalypse, but that is allegedly not due to lack of people trying, nor does it mean that there won't be one forthcoming, especially as this topic gains more and more attention and creators are pointing the finger at one another. It's all incredibly messy, and I will say though, it has been extra interesting since as of a week and a half ago, we started streaming over on Twitch as well in the mornings. It's definitely a different world there. I will say also, in addition to your Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday Philip DeFranco show, I'll be streaming there every morning, at least for this week. So yeah, at 10:30 Eastern, come by twitch.tv/DeFranco Live. But yeah, with all that said, going back to the story, what are your thoughts here? But then, holy hell, do we have some international news today. Because Biden has now given permission to Ukraine to attack deep inside Russia with US-supplied long-range missiles. And this is a massive shift in policy, right? Biden technically eased some restrictions on Ukraine's use of American weapons after Russia opened a new front in the war back in May. But he only allowed the use of something called the High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, or HIMARS, which notably has a range of about 50 miles against Russian forces directly across the border. But this time, Ukraine has permission to use the Army Tactical Missile System, or ATACMS, which has a range of about 190 miles. Though I will say, that said, we're not exactly sure what kind of conditions are attached. But in any case, Biden's decision is reportedly a direct response to Russia bringing North Korean troops into the fight. Because as we've talked about before, at least 10,000 North Korean troops are now believed to be in Russia's Kursk region. And those may actually be part of a force of as many as 50,000 soldiers working to take back the territory in this region that Ukraine seized back in August. And so with all that, the Ukrainians could use the ATACMS to not only strike those Russian and North Korean troops, but also target military equipment, logistics infrastructure, ammunition depots, and supply lines deep inside Russia. But ultimately, no one's really expecting this to fundamentally change the course of the war, at least directly on the ground. Right? Instead, you have American officials saying that one goal is to send a message to North Korea that their troops are vulnerable and that they shouldn't send more of them. And then, of course, this could also have an impact on where things are when Trump gets back into office. Or with US aid in jeopardy, even Zelensky is now saying that he wants to end the war by diplomatic means next year. But until then, right, everything that happens on the ground is going to affect what that looks like. Right? And so the Ukrainians might hope that they'd be able to trade any Russian territory they hold in Kursk for Ukrainian territory held by Russia. But of course, right, if Russia succeeds in taking Kursk back, then Ukraine could end up with nothing to trade at all. But then also with everything at play here, you have some worried that this could backfire. And reportedly fair, even Biden's advisors have been divided on the issue, with some apparently worrying that this could cause Putin to retaliate against not just Ukraine, but its allies. In fact, a recent US intelligence assessment said that Russia would be likely to retaliate with force against the US and its coalition partners if Ukraine was granted permission to carry out long-range strikes. And specifically, they're warning that Russia might step up acts of arson and sabotage targeting facilities in Europe to potentially lethal attacks on American and European military bases. And then actually, with that, you have the Kremlin's spokesperson saying, this decision is reckless, dangerous, aimed at a qualitative change, a qualitative increase in the level of involvement of the United States in this conflict. Though also, notably there, we've seen this kind of rhetoric from Russia for a long time now. Also, that intelligence assessment I mentioned, that was before North Korean troops really came into the equation, which has been considered a major escalation on Russia's part. And so that may have sort of changed the cost-benefit analysis in general. Also, even before Biden's decision, Russia had already been stepping up its sabotage campaign in Europe and planning and carrying out lethal attacks on foreign soil. Right, so the other side of the argument is that Putin will just keep getting more and more aggressive if he's not challenged. And very notably there, that's often been the position of officials in states bordering Russia or otherwise in its old sphere of influence. Right, folks who arguably have the most to fear from escalation. But ultimately, that is where we are right now. And in the meantime, of course, I'd love to know your thoughts here. But then, taking a quick break from the news, how many of you have kicked off 2024 promising to finally turn a passion project into profit, launch a business or a lucrative side hustle or hobby? Because for me, I've been wanting to launch a book club for years, and that procrastination recently ended thanks to my sponsor and friends over at Squarespace. In less than an hour, DeFranco's book club was born. Squarespace has the tools that you need, whether it's to showcase or to create and sell content, courses, or products, physical and digital, all online. It's simple. You just upload and customize your content with their powerful Fluid Engine editor. You add a paywall if you want, you set a price if you want, you do whatever you want. And that includes charging a one-time fee, selling subscriptions, and if you need a starting point, they've got a ton of stunning professional templates with drag and drop editing that makes site design incredibly simple. There's no coding required. Squarespace has been a trusted partner of the PDS for years, and I can honestly say it is a breeze. We even leverage Squarespace for our very own daily newsletter, The Daily Dip. Right, where over 50,000 of you beautiful bastards keep up with our coverage in your inboxes, take part in daily polls and giveaways, and now you can get the PDS show notes with sources over there. So kickstart your own digital space today with a free trial at squarespace.com/Phil or scan the QR code on screen. And don't forget to use code Phil for 10% off when you're ready to launch. That's squarespace.com/Phil. But then, in really interesting news you've probably not heard about, hundreds of miners in South Africa right now have been holed up underground for months, and they may be dying of hunger and thirst. But also, no, right, this is not a cave-in story. Instead, this is because reportedly police have been blocking the exits and denying them food and water. And their reason for doing this is that those miners have apparently been working down there illegally. So what we're seeing is the South African government doing everything they can to force them out and arrest them as part of a nationwide crackdown on illegal mining. With some here, of course, saying that this is going way too far. But also, to really make sense of any of this, we got to go back a bit. Because you probably are aware of or could imagine, mining has a long, dark history in South Africa. In fact, it was once the largest gold-producing nation in the world, but eventually a lot of those mines became unprofitable and they were just left behind. In fact, it's estimated that there are around 6,000 abandoned mines in the country today, except they're also not really abandoned. Instead, what's actually happened is that many have just become part of a massive black market mining industry, which really shouldn't be shocking, with extreme poverty and skyrocketing unemployment driving out-of-work miners and migrants to work in them. In fact, overall, there are estimated to be between 30,000 and 100,000 unlicensed miners in the country. And notably, they sometimes remain underground for weeks at a time, often setting up illegal electricity and water supply systems. And so then with that, organized crime has become involved as well, with experts saying that violence often seeps into surrounding communities, also creating a secondary market for food, alcohol, and sex work. With one local, for example, telling the Washington Post that the sound of gunfire as rival groups fight over territory sometimes keeps her awake at night. And this is, of course, one, there are already the traditional dangers of mining, but also two, it's made worse by the lack of regulation. Like last year, for example, 31 people died in a gas explosion in an unused mine, and then a gas leak linked to illegal mining killed more than a dozen just a few months later. But then not long after those incidents, the government initiating a massive crackdown on illegal mining in the country. And what we've seen since then is many of the thousands arrested through the operation being deported and some being charged criminally. And a key thing with all this is that the state's heavy-handed tactics have drawn criticism. We're seeing things like on November 2nd, South African police saying that 225 miners have been drawn out of one mine as a result of starvation and dehydration. Right after authorities had blocked routes into the mines, authorities also blocking local community members from delivering food parcels, water, and necessities to the mine shafts. And so now they've just been using the tactic again, just on a much bigger scale. Right, specifically at this former gold mining site about 90 miles west of Johannesburg, with us already seeing more than 1,000 miners already emerging and being arrested. Though officials say that there are still between 350 and 400 miners still down there. Though also, we really don't know how sure we are about those numbers. And that's because community members, as well as some miners who have been hauled up, say that it's actually up to 4,000 people that are trapped. And there are reports coming out that the miners have been eating vinegar and toothpaste to try to survive while underground. And it's